Today we're going to talk about the electrolytes, sodium, potassium, and chloride. An electrolyte is a positively or negatively charged ion that conducts an electrical current in solution. Ions are charged atoms. A negative charge means that the atom has gained a negative electron, and a positive charge means that the ion has lost a negative electron. Fluid balance, maintenance, nerve impulse conduction, and cellular signaling are all functions of electrolytes in the body. There are three major electrolytes, including sodium. It has a positive charge and it's outside of the cell. Potassium, it has a positive charge and it's inside the cell. And chloride, it has a negative charge and it's outside the cell. When we look at electrolyte functions, sodium can make us bloated, as you see in this picture here. So high salt intake increases the amount of sodium in the body, and high blood sodium stimulates thirst to dilute the sodium. That's why after a night of a lot of Chinese food or pizza or something like that, your rings might not fit quite as well the next morning, or your pants might not be able to button. That's typically due to sodium and water retention. If we look at the electrolyte functions, you can see that sodium will flow into the cell when you do something like prick your finger. And the flow of sodium and potassium in and outside of cells is going to cause nerve impulses. Electrolytes also help regulate blood pressure. A decrease in blood pressure triggers the kidneys to release the enzyme renin. Renin then converts angiotensin into angiotensin 1, which is then activated to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 increases blood pressure by constricting the walls of the blood vessels. Angiotensin 2 stimulates the release of the hormone aldosterone from the adrenal gland, and aldosterone then increases sodium reabsorption by the kidneys. Water always follows the sodium, which helps maintain blood volume as well as blood pressure. When we look at electrolytes in health and disease, hypertension means high blood pressure, which is blood pressure consistently at or above 140/90 millimeters of mercury or greater. It's caused by increased contractions of the heart, increased blood volume, or decreased radius of blood vessels. It can result in atherosclerosis, heart attack, stroke, and death, which is why we call it a silent killer. And it's treated with diet, exercise, and medication. Risk factors for hypertension include genetics, race, age, obesity, diet, and activity. When we look at the effect of diet on blood pressure, a low sodium diet that's high in fiber, very rich in fruits and veggies, and omega-3 fatty acids can be really helpful in lowering blood pressure if somebody is sodium sensitive. However, of course, there is a genetic component. So DASH, which stands for the Dietary Approach to Stop Hypertension, is very similar to Choose My Plate, except as you can see, the grain group is a little bit higher, the fruit group is a little bit higher, oils are a little bit lower, dairies a little bit lower, and protein specifies some beans, nuts, and seeds in there. There's also specifications for sodium intake, which is much lower than the general population. If you look at the effect of diet on blood pressure, you can see that a typical American diet causes blood pressure to be much higher than the DASH diet. So you can see that the DASH diet is successful in lowering blood pressure in those who are sodium sensitive. Electrolyte deficiency. Electrolyte deficiencies can lead to electrolyte imbalances, which in turn can cause disturbances in acid-base balance, poor appetite, muscle cramps, confusion, apathy, constipation, and irregular heartbeat. Electrolyte toxicity. It's not possible for healthy people to consume too much potassium from foods. However, excess potassium from supplements can cause the heart to stop, and excess sodium from consumption or dehydration could result. The UL for sodium is 2,300 milligrams a day. If somebody's over 51, African American, or has a medical condition, that UL is lowered to 1,500 milligrams a day, and the typical US consumption is 3,400 milligrams per day. So most of us are going above the UL. The potassium DRI is 4,700 milligrams per day. The daily value is 3,500 milligrams per day, and our typical consumption is 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams a day. So as you can see, we typically get too much sodium and too little potassium. Potassium is found in fruits and vegetables, sodium is found in processed foods, so when we're eating our typical SAD or standard American diet, you can see where that would be a problem. When we look at sodium, it's mostly added to processed foods. So having the salt shaker on the table, having naturally present sodium in foods, or cooking at home doesn't account for most of the sodium in the diet. When we look at sodium in processed foods, you can see from different food groups such as nuts and seeds and meats, you can see that, unsalted peanuts, dried cooked kidney beans, and roasted pork will be quite much higher in potassium and lower in sodium. But if they're more processed, so if the beans are canned, you turn those nuts into peanut butter, or you roast the ham, then you can see the sodium goes way up. So eating a diet higher in real food, lower in processed food can be a real benefit for sodium intake, as well as many other things that we've learned about this semester. If we look at sodium on food labels, our current food label would highlight potassium and highlight sodium a little bit more. So you'd see the percentage on the left side for sodium as well as potassium, and potassium would be coupled in with vitamin D as two of the major vitamins and minerals that we want to be looking for. So if we look at a summary of the water and electrolytes, that can be found in Table 8.1. Make sure to check out Table 8.1 to look for sources, recommended intake, major functions, deficiency diseases and symptoms, groups at risk for deficiency, toxicity, and the UL. We're going to talk about the rest of our major minerals and bone health next. So bones are the strongest and hardest structures in the body. They consist of a protein matrix that's mostly made of collagen, which remember requires vitamin C, and then they're hardened by the minerals calcium and phosphorus, magnesium, as well as a little bit of sodium and fluoride. And remember, vitamin D we talked about in the last chapter is needed to maintain the calcium and phosphorus levels. Bones are considered living tissues. They support our weight, they help us participate in movement. They're constantly being remodeled, so broken down and reformed. Our peak bone mass is our maximum bone density, which usually is attained in young adulthood between the age of 25 and 30. And osteoporosis means that there's more bone loss than formation, which results in holes in our bones and fractures. So as you can see, throughout the lifespan, we have a natural increase in bone mass until around age 30, and then that tapers off a little bit from 40 to 50. Females, as they go through menopause, have a distinct decrease for a span of 5 to 10 years because of our loss of estrogen during that time. Bone deposition is estrogen dependent. We have estrogen receptors on our bones, and because females change in estrogen value so much during that menopausal years, they end up losing bone at an accelerated rate. When bones are weakened by osteoporosis, the front edge of the vertebrae collapses more than the back, so you see the spine bends forward. That's called the Dowinger's hump. Osteoporosis, as I mentioned, means more bone loss than formation, results in fractures, and there are a number of risk factors that we can control and we can't control. So we have our level of peak bone mass and the rate at which bone is lost, which is really going to be our determinants for osteoporosis, is affected by genetics, gender, age, hormones, low body weight, and lifestyle, such as smoking, alcohol, exercise, and diet. Women have more age-related bone loss than men when estrogen levels decrease after menopause, as I mentioned. So here you can see a table in 8.2 that shows the risk factor and how it affects risk. So some highlights here. African Americans have denser bones than Caucasians and Southeast Asians. Age, we're going to age throughout the lifespan, and so our risk of osteoporosis is going to increase as we get older. People who are heavier have more weight bearing on their bones, so their bones are going to react by getting stronger. So if you're thin and light, you have an increased risk. If you're a smoker, you're going to decrease bone mass. Exercise, if it's weight bearing, does a similar thing as body size. So if you're constantly putting impact on your bones, they'll react by getting stronger. Also, alcohol and diet, having a diet that's high in calcium, high in vitamin D, as well as some magnesium and phosphorus can really contribute to bone mineralization. One issue that we've seen lately is the consumption of soda in school-age children and high schoolers versus milk. So if we look at milk, it's a pretty nutrient-dense substance. There are some pros and cons to milk that, I'm sure you've heard about in terms of hormones, in terms of whether we should be eating dairy, but just looking nutrient for nutrient, you can see that cola provides a whole lot of energy, and so does milk, but it also provides some caffeine and some phosphorus, which is going to leach a little calcium from our bones, whereas the milk is going to provide almost a third of the day's worth of calcium. So as you can see, if you're consuming way more soda than milk, then that could pose a problem for bone health in the future, especially because childhood and teenage years are really when we want to be focusing on building our bones up as much as possible. So just a little review of these different minerals. Calcium, we need it for muscle contractions, neurotransmitter release, blood pressure, cell communication, and blood clotting. Levels are regulated by hormones, so if it's too high, calcitonin tones it down. Too low, PTH and calcitriol try to bring it up. So you can see vitamin D is also needed to help to increase calcium absorption or stimulate the calcium release from bones. So vitamin D is going to be key in terms of intake, in terms of controlling calcium. We really want to take those two nutrients together. The RDA is 1,000 milligrams per day. The UL is 2,500 milligrams per day. Sources are dairy, dark green veggies, fish with bones, foods that are processed and fortified with calcium. We even see calcium fortified orange juice on the shelves. Deficiency is osteoporosis. Excess could be caused by cancers, could increase certain hormones, and could cause altered availability of certain minerals, as well as weight loss, fatigue, abnormal heartbeat, frequent urination, calcification of the soft tissues, kidney stones, and damage. And as you can see, calcium sources are not only found in the dairy group, but also in fish if we're going to eat their bones, such as in sardines, as well as a lot of greens and a little bit in grains, nuts, and seeds. When we're looking at a calcium supplement, you want to make sure you're choosing a supplement with vitamin D. You want to make sure you're choosing a supplement that gives you 500 milligrams at a time. 500 milligrams is the maximum amount that's been shown to be absorbed, and perhaps taking it twice a day to provide the 100% RDA for men and women. Phosphorus is found with calcium in bones and teeth, as well as in the soft tissue. It's a component of a lot of the things that we've talked about so far, such as phospholipids, DNA, RNA, and ATP structure. It's also important in enzyme activity regulation and cell acidity maintenance. So if we're looking at non-skeletal functions of phosphorus, a lot of that can be found inside the cell in terms of the phospholipid bilayer, in terms of ATP, in terms of DNA and RNA. It makes up a lot of those structures in the cell that we've been talking about in terms of energy metabolism, as well as just the structures that allow things to flow in and out of cells, as well as the genetic material. The RDA is 700 milligrams per day, UL is 4,000 milligrams per day. It's widely spread in foods, and deficiency is rare. In terms of excess, it doesn't seem to be harmful for healthy adults, but there is a concern that soda is so high in phosphorus and so low in calcium that it replaces some of the calcium in our diet. Next time we'll talk about magnesium. So we're going to go through magnesium and the other major minerals in our next lecture.